All right, so welcome back. This is the second day of the 9 weeks, so make sure everyone's trying to get the best grade for the second quarter, right? So that way for the semester, you can get your credit. Yesterday we did notes on conditional statements, okay? So you might remember we had these blue pieces of paper, right? So I'll remind you how we do that in a minute here, but I want you to notice it says, what are the rules for your warm-up? What are the rules for changing the conditional P arrow Q? So P arrow Q, we actually say if P, then Q, or we say P implies Q. That's what we talked about yesterday. Does anyone remember what P stands for? It doesn't start with a P, but it has a P in it. Hypothesis. And then conclusion, there's no Q in it, but it kind of sounds like it could have a conclusion, okay? So P is hypothesis, Q is conclusion, and by the way, I guess for everyone listening to this on the video, today is character day, so that's why we have this cool underwater SpongeBob theme, right? So converse. Who can tell me from yesterday, remind me, what is a converse? So what do I do with P and Q if it's a converse? You switch them, right? So you flip them as if you were at the Krusty Krab and you were flipping them, right? Okay, I tried. But no, really what you do is, check me out, got that P and that Q, right? And what you do, you think of converse, you think of like your Converse shoes, but you got to tie those shoelaces, so you got to do a switcheroo. So instead of P implies Q, it becomes Q implies P. Right? So, what are we going to put for this blank here? What are the rules for changing? For converse, we're going to put switch. Okay? We switch the order. So instead of P arrow Q, it's going to be Q arrow P. Right? That's converse. Now we're going to use an example based on today's character theme. So does everyone see this statement right here on the board? It says, if I'm SpongeBob, then I'm ready. I'm ready. I'm ready. Right? So, if I'm SpongeBob, then I'm ready. What would the converse be of if I'm SpongeBob, then I'm ready? If I'm ready, then I'm SpongeBob. Does everyone see how you just took it and you switch the order? But you keep if and then in the same place. If I'm ready, then I'm SpongeBob. That's the converse. Very good. Now, inverse, what does that word inverse make you think of? Okay? It might make you think of invert, which would be opposite, or inside out, it has in it. But basically, you're going to take the P and the Q and flip it. And I'm flipping these blue pieces of paper, but you'll notice when I take the blue pieces of paper and I invert them, I flip them, on here I've got, it's kind of hard to see, you got little squiggle P, and squiggle Q. Now, what do those squiggles mean? Negation, or opposite, or not, however you want to think about it. Okay? So, if you say squiggle, I know what you mean, but the actual word for it is tilde, kind of like Matilda without the ma. Just tilde, okay? If you didn't notice, it's on your keyboard in the top left corner. All right? So, if P, then Q turns into if not P, then not Q. All right? So we're going to take inverse and make them both opposite. So we're going to write that down. Basically, both sides are opposite. The order stays the same, though. Okay? So instead of P arrow Q, it's going to be not P implies not Q, or squiggle P arrow squiggle Q, right? I'm going to write all this down, you know what I'm saying? So, that's an inverse. So what would the inverse be of my original statement? If I'm SpongeBob, then I'm ready. What's the inverse? What's the opposite of I'm SpongeBob? I'm not SpongeBob. What's the opposite of I'm ready? I ain't ready. All right, so let's put it together. If I'm SpongeBob, then I'm ready. What's the inverse? If I'm not SpongeBob, then I'm not ready. Okay? So that's what an inverse is. Keep the order, but make it opposite for the P and the Q. For contrapositive, you're going to do what with P and Q? Flip them. If that's it, no. It's not just one thing. Okay, they're going to switch places, and I flip them, meaning opposite. Okay? So if you want a visual of that. So I got P implies Q, and for contrapositive, it's both. I'm going to switch the order, and I'm going to flip it. Which means, if I were to read, not Q implies not P. Okay? So starting with P implies Q, flip it, switch it and flip it. Not Q implies not P. Okay? So if we're doing it with our hands, right, we did this yesterday, a few hands up like you're giving 2 high fives. Conditional, if P implies Q. Converse, like I'm tying some shoes. Inverse, just opposite, not P, not Q. And then if I'm doing contrapositive, it's going to be this cool dance at the homecoming. Check it out. Haters gonna hate, so you flip and negate. Alright, so I'm getting a lot of positive feedback. Alright, so contrapositive is going to be both switch and opposite. So instead of P implies Q, it's going to be not Q implies not P. Or squiggle Q, arrow, squiggle P. Alright, so it's switched and it's opposite. And we're all writing this down. Alright? Yeah. Bet. So, that's contrapositive. So let's, did we already do it? If I'm SpongeBob, then I'm ready. What's the contrapositive of if I'm SpongeBob, then I'm ready? No. So remember, take I'm SpongeBob, I'm ready, switch them, and not. So what would it be? Good. If I'm not ready, then I'm not SpongeBob. You see how that works? You got to switch the order and put not. Okay? So once again, the contrapositive is if I'm not ready, then I'm not SpongeBob. Now the last one is biconditional. Biconditional is when it's like a two-way street. They're both true. The converse is true and the original conditional is true. And that phrase we put in between is what? If. We talked about this yesterday on the notes. Thank you. So if and only if. I told you all it was so important yesterday. And again, it's very important. When you do biconditional, you're using the phrase if and only if between P and Q. So help me out here. What is P in this statement? Okay, it's just the I'm SpongeBob. That's my P. Okay, and what's my Q? I'm ready. So here's what you're going to do. Take I'm SpongeBob and I'm ready. And what do I put between them? If and only if. So, now I don't have a fancy way of doing this, so just P implies Q, Q implies P, they're both true, okay? But for the biconditional, I'm going to say, I'm SpongeBob if and only if I'm ready, okay? And so the way we would write it down here would be P double arrow Q, okay? So that's a recap of yesterday's notes. If you weren't here, you should have been writing this down. And it breaks my heart that some people who were not here yesterday are not writing this down. Awkward inhale. So, unfortunate. What we want to do now is what we're doing all week is I'm giving y'all some red ribbon week factoids. Okay? So, we'll be talking about what are called dissociative drugs and their effects.